When you're recording audio tracks, obviously you'll need to be able to hear what you're recording, or the artist that you're recording, if you're the producer, will need to hear what they're recording as well, and that is known as monitoring. And there's a number of different ways to monitor inside of Cubase depending on which mode you like better or what fits the situation more appropriately. You'll notice that on my audio track, when I record Enable It, the monitor light comes on automatically. That's because I have Cubase set to tape machine style. And in tape machine style monitoring, when you're recording, you'll hear the recording, and when you're playing back, you'll hear the playback. So let's make sure that you're using that type of monitoring as well. And that's in Preferences. So on a Mac, you'll go under the Cubase menu and go to Preferences, or you'll find that same setting under the File menu on Windows at the bottom of the list. Then when you get into the Preferences window, you're going to scroll down on the left-hand side until you see the VST setting. Then you're going to come over to the bottom of this list and you're going to change what monitoring you want to use, or what auto monitoring will work with the tracks that you have record enabled. Sometimes this is set to manual, which means that you'll have to turn on not only the record button, but you'll also have to turn on the monitor button. And some situations will require that. But instead, I want the monitor to turn on whenever I record enable the track. So I'll come back to Preferences here and I'll set the auto monitoring to tape machine style. Then I'll click on OK so that my monitor comes on when I click the record enable button. Then I want to be able to monitor my recordings without any latency whatsoever. And to do that, I'm going to go under the Studio menu and go to Studio Setup, and I'm going to click on whatever appears below Audio System right here, and I'm going to enable direct monitoring. And that's different than monitoring through the interface or through Cubase. So when you're thinking about audio monitoring, what you're really thinking about is a balance of something. You're balancing the input of your audio interface versus the output of the other previously recorded tracks. Or another way to think of that is the recording versus playback. And another way to think of that balance is the interface versus the DAW, in this case, Cubase. And another way to think of it is the DAW through effects. And we'll get back to that a little bit later. But let's continue to think of that balance concept. Some audio interfaces actually have a balance control right on the front panel, or in the software I'll show you in just a moment. Here we see a mix knob on the front of this particular audio interface where we can balance the amount of input level that we're hearing or monitoring versus how much of the DAW we're monitoring. So it's that balance of the inputs or the DAW. And if you're using direct monitoring, you'd want that knob to be somewhere between input and DAW, somewhere right in the middle, just achieving that balance so that you can hear the tracks that were previously recorded and be able to hear the track that you're currently recording. And if you're using direct monitoring, you're monitoring the input. And some audio interfaces establish that balance through a software program that it comes with. In my case, with an RME RADAT audio interface on my big machine, I have 32 possible inputs, and I would change their monitoring level by adjusting the input levels here in the RME Total Mix console. So your audio interface may come with something similar like this. So you'd have to turn up the inputs to be able to hear them during direct monitoring. And like I mentioned, the big advantage to direct monitoring is that you won't have any latency whatsoever. So the input and output latency that you would normally be monitoring through the computer, which we'll do a little bit later on, will not be a factor when you're recording with direct monitoring on. You'll hear exactly what's happening on the input at the time at which it is happening. So no latency. And keeping with that concept of being able to monitor the pre-recorded tracks with the ones that you're now recording, I'm going to turn down the level or rebalance the level of these pre-recorded tracks. And so I'm going to turn down the string pad and the lead synth and keep my bass where it is, but the drums I'm going to turn up just a little bit because I definitely want to hear those for the timing of this new audio track. So I'm changing the balance of those tracks recorded earlier with a new one I'm about to record. And next I'll show you the audio recording modes.